This case is Maurice M. versus Des Moines Independent Community School District and Heartland Area Education Agency. It was concluded in August of '04. Some background information on Maurice. Maurice was 15 years old at the time of the complaint. Maurice started receiving educational services at the age of 2. Maurice was diagnosed with ADHD and asthma and Crohn's disease during that time frame, and then he received medications for all of those things. He also received services through a healthcare plan as well as through individual education plans. Some concerns that came up during the entire time there that he was being served is that he often has behavioral concerns, defiance and disruption, and he has a low average range of intelligence. He lacks confidence and then has concerns with negative self-talk, anxiety, and verbal aggression. Some accommodations that have worked have been that he benefits from clear and consistent expectations. He does well in structured settings. He tends to need a positive behavior support plan. The function of his behavior is often escape, and he has benefited from a 3-strike program during his middle school years. The parental complaints range over a couple-year period, so we'll just start kind of at the beginning with that. With his mom, we'll start with an IEP meeting that occurred in April prior to his last year of middle school. That IEP, there were goals in areas pretty much across the board, and they developed a behavior intervention plan with a 3-strike rule where he had 2 verbal redirects and then would go to the office in order to regroup and then return to the classroom. In November of that school year, there was a meeting held to make adjustments to the plan before high school, even though at this point the plan had been working well and then continued to do so the rest of the school year, but they wanted to make the BIP a little bit more applicable to that setting. In December, there was a meeting to assess the assistive technology needs. In January, they were looking at the student health plan, just all in preparation for the high school transition. But then at the end of January, there was a pre-mediation meeting because Maurice's mother wanted to make sure that he was being served in his science class, and she thought that he needed to be moved to a different teacher because she felt that the teacher wasn't meeting his needs and following the plan. This pre-mediation resulted in some additional services for Maurice, including some tutoring and then a fax machine provided to mom to facilitate communication with the school. In March of that year, there was an IEP review meeting that discussed behavior and a recent suspension. And again, Maurice's mother felt that the teachers were not using the behavior plan. A finding of this, of some investigating, found that the teachers were not using the plan. They were giving multiple warnings instead of the 2 indicated in his plan, and then they were hesitant to use consequences. And Maurice continued to be disruptive, and he also made threats to get his mother involved. It was also part of this finding that they needed to conduct an FBA. A short time later, Maurice's mother withdrew consent for the FBA and special education classes. The administrator suggested that she call an IEP meeting so that a decision could be made, and then the mom went ahead and filed for due process. At the district meeting, their mom still wanted to have Maurice removed from special education, but she testified that she was interested in doing this in order to help him enroll in a alternate high school than he was supposed to feed into. She wanted him to be in Roosevelt High School, and they were only open enrolling general education students, so she thought that he would be eligible if he was general education. It did end up coming to be that he was able to open enroll to Roosevelt, and then in June that year they met with the team there with Roosevelt representatives in order to prepare him to have his behavior needs met and his IEP needs met through Roosevelt. Mom was resistant to some services there. She was wanting him to be treated like any other high school student and not as a special education student, but did end up agreeing to have a behavior intervention services there. In September of that year, his first year of high school at Roosevelt, there was a psychological assessment done for his 3-year evaluation. The school psychologist conducted the assessment and determined that everything seemed to be going pretty well with the plan. Maurice was making progress, and the IEP that was currently in place appeared to be meeting his needs. A month later, that IEP was finalized for the year, and it did have an adjusted behavior plan. Mom had been under this understanding that the 3-strike program would continue for middle school, and that with the adjustments that they had made the year prior, but they didn't quite follow that plan. The school testified that they felt that it was open for changes because it was a new school. They did implement what they called, it was level 2 services, basically, that it's kind of like a 3-strike program. When you read through the program, it was verbal redirection, and then a second redirection, and then on the third he would be removed, and instead of going to the office this time, he would go to the level 2 room, which was a place for processing, crisis intervention processing, and then also confronting thinking errors. This plan for behavioral intervention did not indicate any strategies for unstructured areas of the school, like the hall or before or after school time. Later, the school officials testified that this was not feasible to provide strategies for this time, and it was not a realistic need that could be met within their school. And then also, the plan did not have any positive strategies. And once this plan was implemented and given to all the teachers, his level 2 room referrals increased, and this had a negative effect on Maurice and his participation in school. At this point, the negative behaviors in the non-structured settings, like the hallways and before and after school in the hallways, escalated, and he started to have more behavior issues. At this time, his mom asked that she be notified of these things and have better communication. Shortly after, there was another behavior incident where moms felt that the lack of communication and not following the plan were the issue there too. In December, a mediation for the behavior intervention plan occurred, and they modified the plan, and a lot of the changes in the plan were directed to contact with mom. A lot of times, if there was a behavior and Maurice needed to calm down, he was able to call his mother. He was also able to process with preferred adults in the building, but if those adults weren't available, he could call his mom, and his mom would make the determination on when it was okay for him to go back to his classroom. And that continued on for the remainder of the year, although later the school officials and teachers testified that even though they were members of the IEP team and didn't agree that this was the best plan for Maurice, that because of mediation and mom's request for this, that's what they did. In May, there was an IEP meeting to do a manifestation determination because Maurice had now been suspended for 9 days, and he was facing another suspension that would put him over the 10-day limit. They did determine that the behavior was a manifestation of his disability, but then determined that he would be better served in an alternate placement. This is where the issue comes up that is being decided in this case, that they're looking at mom wants Maurice to remain at Roosevelt. He'd been served there for a year and had made progress on his IEP goals, despite having some behavioral issues. But then the Roosevelt is saying that they cannot serve him in their building because he has had too many behavior issues, he's taxing on teachers' time, he is not being well served, and that he would be better served in another placement. The applicable laws here are primarily least restrictive environment, and that would include the 3 considerations with supplemental aids and services. Are they being provided? The educational benefit of the least restrictive environment, and then is it a detriment to the child to have them in that placement? Additional applicable laws are the manifestation determination laws, behavior intervention plans and services, IEP laws, and FAPE. However, the main issue here is least restrictive environment. The final decision really reflected least restrictive environment being the main issue, and then it addressed the 3 areas to consider. The supplemental aids and services, it was decided that the district failed to show that Maurice's goals and objectives could not be implemented at Roosevelt. The educational benefit of the LRE, the district failed to show that the more restrictive environment was necessary for him to benefit from his program, and the progress monitoring data and testimony showed that Maurice had made gains in all IEP goal areas that year that he was at Roosevelt. And then the detrimental effects to the child, the district argued that it was detrimental that the teachers their time was being taxed heavily in dealing with him, and that was detrimental to the school environment and the other children that they served. It was also suggested that the lack of a budget to accommodate Maurice's needs would be a detriment to him. It was determined that these were not sufficient detriments, and the district didn't prove that the placement, that current placement was detrimental. The appellant prevailed, which is the mother, and Roosevelt was not proven to be unable to provide FAPE, and that a more restrictive placement was needed. So it was determined that it was not needed in the end. My personal response is that this is an appropriate finding. It makes perfect sense that at this point he was served, well served in the building. He made progress on all of his goals. I do think that there was more that the school could do as far as behavior intervention plans. Although they did testify that there was a lot of positive interactions going on, there was a lot of support and positive behavioral supports, but that wasn't documented anywhere or progress monitored, and I think that could have been done better to show what they were doing. I also think that there was a lot of suggestion in the writing and in the testimony that there was over advocating by the mom, and I could definitely see where that was happening, that maybe the IEP team was not as worried about finding consensus as they were letting mom have her way sometimes, that it was just easier maybe. I'm not sure exactly what their motivation was there, but it did seem like the IEP team just kind of went ahead with things that mom wanted, even if it wasn't in Maurice's best interest. The IEP team and administrators and teachers, I really feel, could have gone a little bit further to reach mom, to really connect with her in order to make it a more amicable situation and to prevent some of the concerns and conflicts that happened. Implications. I think that the first implication I thought was that there's a great responsibility of the team to include parents' ideas, but also provide for the needs of the children. So you definitely have to take into consideration, you want the parents involved, you want them to be a part of the team, but you also need to make sure that they are understanding what you can offer, what would be in the best interest of the child, and then explaining to them how those things can benefit them and why it's important for the kids to have those services. And I think that if maybe the teachers and administrators in this situation would have gone a little bit further, maybe that would have helped the situation. Additionally, another implication is that budget constraints aren't an excuse to not meet the needs of children with special education. And I think that goes without saying, but it definitely is something you need to take into consideration, especially in the current environment of paying for education. And then communication is also really important. That kind of goes without being said, but communication relationships are so important that a little bit of extra effort to build and maintain relationships with a parent can really pay off in the end. The questions for thought. What are your thoughts on how to best balance parental concerns and the best interests of the child when they do not appear to be fully aligned? And then step into both the administrator and parental shoes and provide an idea or two from each perspective on how you could have avoided this conflict. Thank you very much and have a good day.